Okay, so today we're going to go deep on something pretty fundamental, right? Like, how do we really, truly reinvent ourselves?
Yeah, this is exciting stuff, and we've been digging into a really interesting discussion on this from the English Leap podcast, with Aaron and Evan.
Absolutely, yeah. And I bet some of you are thinking, hold on, why are we looking at a podcast about learning English if we're talking about reinvention in, like, every aspect of our life?
Right, exactly. But here's the thing. Their conversation went way beyond just grammar and vocabulary tips.
Mhm.
They actually unearthed these really profound principles about how to break free from like old patterns and actually create lasting change. So that's our mission today. We're going to distill all that down for you guys.
I love that. Give you those aha moments that spark real transformation, not just more info to file away, but stuff you can use now.
Yeah, and I think what really grabbed me right away was just how relatable Aaron and Evan's starting points were. Like Aaron was talking about how she struggles with procrastination, and Evan mentioned being totally hooked on checking his phone all the time.
Oh, tell me about it. I feel so seen right now. It's like they're speaking directly to my soul, and I think that's what's so great about it. They're taking this kind of like, this lofty idea of reinvention and bringing it down to earth.
Totally, making it about these changes we all grapple with.
Hmm.
And they really get to the heart of it quickly, right? This idea that reinvention, it's not just about setting a bunch of New Year's resolutions or trying to force yourself into these like new behaviors. It goes deeper.
Way deeper. It's like it starts with your identity, like the core beliefs you hold about yourself.
Yeah, and when you reshape that identity, then the habits start to shift, naturally.
Like they flow from that. So if
Yeah,
anyone out there has ever felt stuck, like really stuck in a rut, this one's for you.
definitely. So let's dive into this whole idea of self-perception. Erin had this moment of clarity where she realized how long she'd been telling herself and telling everybody else this story about being a procrastinator.
It's like she just completely accepted that as her label.
Right.
It became like her operating system. Like, this is who I am.
Totally. And that brings us to this huge point about how much our self-belief actually shapes our actions. You know, think about it. If you really believe you are a certain type of person, you're so much more likely to just act in ways that confirm that belief.
It's like you're unconsciously trying to prove yourself right.
Right. And this is especially relevant for things like learning English. If someone's walking around with this belief that I'm just not good at languages, well, that becomes this massive roadblock. It makes them hesitant to speak up, to try new things, and ultimately it hinders their progress.
Makes total sense.
Yeah. And what's even more interesting is that Erin mentioned something she'd read about how our brains actually rewire themselves based on our thoughts, the thoughts we repeat over and over again.
Wow. Okay, so if she's constantly thinking I work best under pressure, her brain is literally building those neural pathways, like making her believe it's true, even if it's just a convenient excuse for procrastinating.
Exactly. It's like training yourself to believe something.
Yeah.
And Evan expanded on this with this whole concept of a like self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Your brain's working in the background to basically confirm your beliefs,
It wants to be right.
right? So if your go-to thought is like, I'll just do it later, your brain's going to strengthen that procrastination habit, almost like you're like training it to reinforce the very thing you're trying to change.
So it's like this crazy loop. It's mind-blowing, honestly. And it makes you realize that, okay, the first step in reinventing yourself isn't just like willpower, trying to white-knuckle your way to new habits. It's about looking at those foundational stories we tell ourselves about who we are and actually questioning them, maybe even rewriting them.
Totally. Like who's the author of your story?
Yeah, exactly.
But shifting your self-perception, that's just one side of the coin, right? The next big piece is to really envision vividly the person you actually want to become.
Oh, yeah. Erin talked about this. She was saying that she used to try to overcome procrastination by, like, focusing on all the things she should be doing, right? All those tasks, those deadlines. But she realized she never really took the time to imagine herself actually being a non-procrastinator.
Yeah, and that is a huge difference
Right. It's so different,
because that visualization, it makes that future self so much more real. And Aaron and Evan encourage everyone to really get specific. What does that look like? How does that feel? When you picture yourself, that reinvented self, actually living your life.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. And again, this applies directly to all of us, right? Like for anyone learning English, instead of just having this vague goal of being fluent someday, really picture yourself. Imagine having a conversation effortlessly understanding those movies you love. It's like actually feel it.
It's powerful. It fuels the motivation.
It does. But,
Yeah.
Erin made this really insightful point. She was like, just having a clear picture of your future self, that doesn't magically wipe out all those ingrained patterns. It's a process.
Oh, definitely a process. And
Yeah.
it can be uncomfortable, like letting go of the old identity. Erin brought up her own story, about working better under pressure.
Oh, yeah. She's held on to that one for a long time.
Yeah, and as comfy and familiar as those stories can be, even the ones that don't really serve us anymore, they can really keep us stuck, like an anchor.
Totally. So true reinvention, it means making a decision, right? It means consciously choosing to release that old version of yourself.
Yeah, acknowledging that those past beliefs and habits don't have to be your future.
This is so important for anyone who's ever said, like, well, that's just how I am. I can't change, right? Like for English learners, maybe it's, I've always been bad at languages.
Right. But Erin and Evan were so clear about this. That's not some, fixed truth. It's a story, and you have the power to rewrite it.
Love that. And they even told this story, a really inspiring one, about Colonel Sanders, right? He didn't hit it big with KFC until he was in his 60s, after
Right.
tons of setbacks.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a powerful reminder. It shows that reinvention doesn't have an age limit. It's never too late to redefine your story.
Never too late. So
So
good. And I love how they emphasize shifting our focus from who we were to who we're becoming. It's so future-oriented.
it is, and it's about action too. So we've talked about self-perception, visualization, letting go of the old stories. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty, right? How do we actually make this shift happen?
Yeah, like rubber meets the road type stuff. What do we do every day?
Exactly. And Erin and Evan were big on the power of small, consistent actions.
Okay. Small, consistent, I like it.
Because a lot of times we get paralyzed by this idea of a huge, massive change,
Right.
right? Like a complete overhaul. Erin was honest about this. She said the kind of thinking actually makes her procrastinate more because it's so daunting.
Oh, I feel that. Overwhelm is the enemy of action for sure.
Right. But real change, it usually doesn't come from those sweeping dramatic gestures. It's the tiny steps we take regularly. To give a great example, instead of trying to have an entire day of perfect productivity, just commit to 5 minutes of focused work.
5 minutes. Anyone can do 5 minutes.
Right. It's way less intimidating. And they say what often happens is that once you start, the momentum builds.
You get in the flow. It's like that saying, well begun is half done.
Yeah, exactly. And for English learners, this is so key. Instead of feeling like you have to study for hours, just commit to 5 minutes of speaking practice or listen to one short podcast episode.
It's those little wins that keep you going.
Totally. It's all about building momentum. So reinvention, whether it's beating procrastination or getting fluent in a new language, it's not this one big dramatic event. It's about those daily choices, the tiny steps you take consistently.
It adds up bit by bit. So it's not just the actions, it's what we're telling ourselves, right? That inner dialogue, the constant chatter in our minds. Oh, that's so huge. Erin talked about catching those negative thoughts, ugh, I'm just no good at this. She really emphasizes stopping that kind of self-talk.
Because the way we talk to ourselves, it shapes our reality. If you're constantly saying, I always procrastinate, your brain almost takes that as an order. It reinforces those neural pathways associated with
Yeah.
procrastinating.
It's like giving yourself a command. Evan made this really cool analogy. He said your brain is basically following orders based on what you feed it through your self-talk. And this is so common for people learning English. If they tell themselves, I'm terrible at speaking, it just amplifies that hesitation and anxiety around practicing.
Right. And then you avoid speaking,
Yeah.
so you don't improve, and the cycle continues.
Yeah.
So how do we break the cycle? How do we reprogram ourselves?
Well, Erin had this great suggestion, right? It might feel weird at first, but instead of that automatic, I'm so bad at this, try swapping it out for something more positive and encouraging, even if it feels kind of corny at first.
Like what? Give us some examples. I think we all need to hear this. Sure, instead of, I'm so bad at this, try saying something like, I'm getting better every day, or I'm making progress, or even, I'm learning and growing.
Yeah, it might feel forced at first, but honestly, what's the harm? It can't hurt to try, right?
Exactly. Changing your inner dialogue can really start to change your actions. And ultimately, it can even shift those core beliefs about yourself.
Totally. It's like those affirmations people talk about,
Yeah,
Just repeat them until you start to believe it.
exactly. And another crucial aspect of making this reinvention stick is optimizing your environment. This is huge.
Yeah.
Erin gave a really relatable example. She talked about how her phone is a huge source of distraction, pulling her away from what she wants to achieve.
Oh, yeah. Our surroundings can either help us change or they can totally sabotage us. They can make it so much harder.
Yeah, they were really practical about this too. They talked about putting away those temptations, Like if your phone's a problem, put it in another room.
Yeah.
Or rearrange your workspace. Make it a place where you can actually focus.
So simple, but so effective. Out of sight, out of mind, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for those of you learning English, think about creating an immersive environment. Listen to English podcasts on your commute. Change your phone's language settings. Even put sticky notes with new vocabulary words around your house. Little things make a difference.
They really do. It's like you're surrounding yourself with the language. You're creating this little English bubble for yourself.
Yeah, totally. And it makes it easier to, just absorb the language naturally.
Love that. Okay, so we're seeing a pattern here. Reinvention. It's not like this magic overnight transformation.
Right.
It's these small intentional actions we take consistently in an environment that supports our goals.
And of course, it's all fueled by that fundamental shift in our self-perception and managing our self-talk.
Totally. Like Erin thought she'd just wake up one day as this super productive person, but it doesn't work that way, does it?
Nope. It's those little daily choices, those small things we do consistently. And it's so true for language learning. Fluency, it doesn't happen overnight. It's about consistent practice, even when it's just a little bit at a time.
Okay, so it's those small, consistent actions, the things we do every day, that really shape who we are.
Right.
It's like you act your way into a new identity.
Yeah. And that brings us to this massive idea of commitment. Real lasting change happens when you make a decision and you stick with it. It's like making a declaration, this is who I am now, and then backing that up with your actions every single day.
It's not just hoping for change, it's deciding.
Yes. And Erin talked about her commitment to taking action on things right away instead of letting procrastination take over.
And that's something anyone can apply right now. Think about one small habit that's going to help you grow, whether it's tied to a specific goal or just this overall desire for, personal reinvention.
Yeah. At the end of their podcast, Erin and Evan challenged their listeners to pick one small step they could take that day to move towards that reinvented self. And they encouraged people to say it out loud. Write it down. Tell someone.
I love that idea. Accountability. Okay, so we've talked about reinvention in this really broad sense, but before we wrap up, it's worth mentioning that part of the English Leap podcast is focused on, vocabulary, right? They always include this segment with intermediate level words and phrases, stuff to help English learners express themselves better.
Yeah, and we haven't gone into specific vocabulary in this deep dive, but it's cool to remember that, language learning and personal growth, they're often linked.
Yeah.
They can really reinforce each other.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up our deep dive here, let's recap what we've learned from Erin and Evan. Reinventing yourself, it's this multifaceted thing.
Yeah, there are a lot of moving pieces.
It starts with understanding that our self-perception is powerful, and then visualizing the future self we want to be.
And it takes a conscious effort to let go of those old limiting stories we tell ourselves and taking consistent, even small, actions.
Right, and managing that inner critic, that voice that tells us we can't do it. We have to replace that with a more encouraging voice and creating an environment that supports us.
Yeah. And ultimately committing to the daily choices that build our new identity. It's a journey.
It is. And we really hope this conversation has sparked some new ideas for you, giving you some tools and some inspiration to start your own journey of personal reinvention. And remember, this goes way beyond language learning.
Oh, yeah. This is about every aspect of your life.
And I just wanted to mention that Erin and Evan, they often offer some extra resources too, like a free PDF guide with key takeaways and exercises. So if you want to dig deeper, definitely check that out. It's like having a workbook to help you implement everything we've talked about.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So as you go about your day, think about one concrete step you can take. Just one. Maybe it's inspired by what we've talked about identity, action, commitment, and keep learning, keep growing. Because that consistent action, no matter how small it seems, that's where the real power of reinvention lies.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I love it.
All right, so that's it for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See you then. Keep reinventing yourselves, everyone.
Absolutely. It's a lifelong journey, and remember, it's all about those small steps.